Distinguished guests, esteemed panelists, colleagues, and participants from around the world, a very good morning. And wherever you join us all over the world, we are very happy to welcome you to another episode of our webinar on the series of Peace in Myanmar. On behalf of the organizing team, it is now my honor and privilege to welcome you to today's webinar, specially titled Peace Building in Myanmar. This conversation takes place against a backdrop of profound humanitarian urgency and enduring political complexity in that region. Myanmar has for decades grappled with protracted armed conflicts and deep seated ethnic divisions. The country's political landscape has been marred by military rule, contested governance, and systemic exclusion of ethnic minorities. Amid this fraught environment, we have witnessed the tragic and large scale displacement of populations, most notably the Rohingya people, who remain one of the largest stateless groups in the world. Over 1 million Rohingyas have been forcibly displaced, with many now residing in precarious conditions in neighboring Bangladesh and other parts of the region. The situation in Rakhine State, once the epicenter of mass violence, is now compounded by new layers of catastrophe. The recent earthquake has deepened the already acute humanitarian crisis, reducing homes, schools, and infrastructure to rubble and severely limiting access to aid and essential services. In this context, dear audience, the concept of establishing a humanitarian corridor as advocated by the United Nations and various international acts has taken on renewed significance, such as a mechanism could allow for the safe and unimpeded delivery of life-saving assistance and potentially serve as a precursor to broader reconciliation efforts. Moreover, there are early but noteworthy signs of transition on the ground. The reported cessation of hostilities between Arakan Army and Tatmadaw marks a critical juncture in Myanmar's conflict dynamics. If sustained, it could open a window, albeit a narrow one, for building the conditions necessary for durable peace. The question before us now is, what does peace truly look like in Myanmar's future? The audience, a forward looking peace building strategy must go beyond ceasefires. It must envision a Marshall Plan type reconstruction initiative for Rakhine State, rebuilding not just its physical infrastructure, but its social, political, and economic foundations. True peace must include justice, accountability, and voluntary, safe, and dignified repatriation of all the displaced people, underpinned by international legal safeguards and community level trust building. In this endeavor, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations has a critical role to play. As a regional body with a mandate for peace and stability, ASEAN must evolve from a posture of non interference to proactive engagement, facilitating diplomatic mediation, coordinating humanitarian response, and supporting inclusive political dialogues that prioritize the voice of Myanmar's diverse communities. The audience, we are pleased to note that this webinar is a part of the broader Peace in Myanmar project led by Conflict and Resilience Research Institute. This initiative is accessible in our website www.cric.org/project, aims to foster dialogue, research, and policy engagement around the complex challenges of peace building in Myanmar. It serves as a platform for collaboration between scholars, civil society, and international actors committed to advancing justice and reconciliation in the region. Our conversation today is further informed by the outcomes of United Nations Peacekeeping Ministerial Conference held recently in Berlin on May 13 and 14 of this year. In his keynote address, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres reaffirmed the centrality of peacekeeping as a tool to support ceasefires, protect civilians, facilitate humanitarian access, and pave the way for sustainable political solutions. The Berlin Ministerial Conference called for enhanced training and stronger partnership with all the actors in globally. It reminds us that peace is not merely an absence of war, but the active construction of institution, trust, and justice. The audience, today's webinar brings together a range of perspectives from scholars and practitioners and to explore the multifaceted pathways towards sustainable peace in Myanmar. We will examine both the structural drivers of the conflict and the emerging opportunities for resolution and peace building, while reflecting on the responsibilities of regional and international actors. Let's approach this discussion with analytical rigor, moral clarity, and shared commitment to justice, dignity, and peace for all people of Myanmar. The audience, we are very privileged to have with us Dr. Imtiaz Ahmed from Bangladesh, a lead researcher and one of the main collaborators of our project. And also from Malaysia, we have Ms. Lilian Fan. So first, I would like to invite Dr. Imtiaz Ahmed for his opening remarks, and then I will invite Ms. Lilian Fan to this discussion. And before Dr. Imtiaz jumps in, dear audience, let me also acknowledge treaty that we are in. Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada is located on original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the original lands of Metis Nation. We are all treaty people, and we work together in the true spirit of truth and reconciliation. So without further ado, Dr. Imtiaz, please go ahead, sir. Take the stage. So unmute, sir, kindly.
Good. Thank you, Kausar, the rest of the members, and good earth to all of you, given the time difference. It's always a pleasure to talk to this particular platform. And given the collaboration, I think this is very timely, particularly this topic on peace in Myanmar. Now, peace has been a very comprehensive concept and a very old concept also. It's very much close to South Asian cosmology and, of course, civilizations. And this was well portrayed in T.S. Eliot's one of his famous poems. If you remember, he ended with three particular words: Datta, Dayadham, Damyatta, and then he said Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Now, why did T.S. Eliot chose this Datta, Dayadham, and Damyatta? This is very interesting. The concept comes from Upanishad, the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, where three group of beings understood the word da differently. When humans heard the word da, they took it as dattu, because given that humans are into greed, the idea was that humans ought to give. So they heard dattu, whereas the anti-gods heard dayadham, given that they are into cruelty, they were told to be compassionate. So that's where Dayadham stands for. And the gods who were given to pleasure, they heard it as Damyatta, control yourself or restrain yourself. So when it comes to peace or Shanti, it's a very old concept. Even in other religions, for example, if you take Islam, for example, I think a Muslim talks about Shanti almost 100 times every day, because our salutation is Assalamu alaikum, and salam means peace, peace be upon you. And the original idea was the seniors would tell the juniors, peace be upon you. But it became a little bit different. Now the juniors have to tell the seniors that peace be upon you. That also is very, very interesting. But salam, has been very much part of the Islamic world, and the word Shanti, although I don't know whether they think that they are saying peace, but that is what word means. So in different religions or different civilizations, the word Shanti or word peace has really played a very important role, and yet we are still struggling with peace. Now, coming to Myanmar, I think one has to keep in mind that in contemporary times, peace, of course, is a contested concept. but it has universal values. There is no doubt. There is no doubt that they would have universal values, in the sense everybody would want peace. But there are certain issues which need to be understood, uh, because if we bring or adjust peace with stability, then it doesn't work, because sometimes the stability not necessarily would bring peace, and sometimes peace, uh, it is instability, which there are countries who would want instability, because uh, that allows them to make profits. So we have to be very careful when we talk about stability. Not all countries would want stability, because there are not only countries, there are communities, there are groups, there are business who would also benefit from instability. Some of them, they thrive on instability, and that is the problem. And because we always take that stability, everybody wants stability, not necessarily. So we have to be very careful. Those who are into producing arms, they certainly would want instability in many ways. But at the same time, there are lobbies who also profit from instability. So that's one part of the argument that I want to make in understanding the state of Myanmar. The second point is that somehow we made a mistake of understanding Myanmar in the Westphalian understanding of modern state. Myanmar has never been a classical Westphalian modern state with sovereignty in one place. It has always had fragmented sovereignties, a little bit similar to Afghanistan, for example. And there are other countries in the world which has fragmented sovereignties. In Myanmar case, we know there are 135 communities, 135 ethnic communities, but 8 or 10 have a real proto-sovereignty. They have their own flags, they have their own military, one or two have their own currency. So they have a kind of proto-sovereignty, or what I would call a fragmented sovereignty. And that is something that we have not understood. And not all countries have, made their relationship with Myanmar with other ethnic groups. They mainly had their, as the UN system would dictate, whoever controls the central government or the capital. But in Myanmar case, that has not been the case, particularly when it comes to understanding a modern state. And now that got further fragmented with the conflict between Tatmadaw and NUG PDF, particularly after the ouster of Aung San Suu Kyi. And this is almost like the main majority community got fragmented. And of course, the ethnic armed organizations were still there, but an additional one, and that has further put the idea of sovereignty into question, particularly a centralized sovereignty. Now, when it comes to, and I come very quickly because I think Kausar has mentioned about the human corridor. We can limit ourselves a little bit today to that particular discussion. Now, what I see is there's a little bit of difference between the way the United States wanted to handle the Myanmar or the Rohingya issue, and particularly after the fall of Aung San Suu Kyi, and now the emerging understanding of U.S. foreign policy seems to be a little bit different. Listening to Donald Trump, even his speech in Saudi Arabia, will tell you that his understanding seems to be different. How far he can carry that understanding is debatable, but it looks like in many respects it's fundamentally different. Now, way the Democratic Party, United States, was creating the trajectory was quite clear. They came out with the Burma Act. They also tabled the Rohingya Gap Act, which is Genocide Accountability Protection Act. That is still tabled, that it has not been approved, but the Burma Act is there. And so it clearly shows that they were more interested in getting involved in Myanmar issue. Whether that would be carried through by the current administration is something we still have to wait and see. My personal view is that I don't think so. It doesn't look like. It's taking time a little bit, because it doesn't look like the United States under Trump would be interested in a new conflict. But we have to wait and see. Now, the problem became complicated with the conflict, with the civil war that we have now, which is also very multi-layered, because you have on the one hand a conflict between Tatmadaw and NUG PDF, but at the second level you have a conflict between Tatmadaw and ethnic armed organizations, including the Arakan army. Now, the ethnic armed organizations, looking into the fragmentation or division of the majority community, thought that this was the right moment to increase their power, and that is precisely what they're doing. And we have seen, particularly with the Arakan region, the Arakan army has come to control, some say 70 to 80%, although the strategic posts, the strategic roads and highways are still not with them, but on the overall, they have quite hold on the Arakan, particularly in the Bangladesh-Myanmar border. Now, I guess from the international community and a little bit from Bangladesh side also, there is a frustration with the repatriation process. It has not come about. There has been some movements on that, but nothing concrete. So there's a growing frustrations, and I guess there are groups, policymakers who are thinking of taking a different line, maybe a more hard line. Some would say that it's is going nowhere. So how about doing something different? Now, whether that is the reason, that is what has contributed to the idea of corridor or humanitarian corridor, we don't know. The concept is really is so fluid that no one really knows what the corridor stands for, what humanitarian corridor stands for. My understanding is that that maybe whatever the support that the UN was giving to people in the Arakan through Tatmadaw or through Yangon, since it can't be given now, the idea maybe is to give it from a different route, and maybe through Bangladesh, through Chittagong port or through Cox's Bazar, particularly the supply of food, the medicine, whatever the humanitarian, the standard definition of some of the things that we find. Now the point here is, if that is the case, we don't know, but if we, for argument's sake, if we take that is what corridor means, we need to be very, very careful, because in the press, in the media, we hear this concept that it's a UN-led effort, but we are yet to see a UN General Assembly resolution on the humanitarian corridor. At least I haven't seen any resolution. There's no resolution by the General Assembly. There's no resolution by the Security Council, since it would require some element of security. There has to be a Security Council resolution that is not there. On the top of that, just 3 days back, there was a discussion on Bangladesh, China 50 years, where the Chinese ambassador made it very clear that they are not part of this corridor. They have no idea, they're not part of it. So it clearly shows that there's no Security Council resolution on the corridor. And more importantly, if you look at the history of humanitarian corridor, wherever it has been done, you need some elements of what you call recognition from the conflicting parties. So in this case, not only, of course, the General Assembly resolution and Security Council resolutions are required if it is UN-led corridor, but at the same time, you need a written agreement with Tatmadaw, because after all, Tatmadaw is still, or Myanmar is a part of the international community and the UN system. There's the issue of sovereignty, and also you need an agreement with Arakan army. If we take that Arakan army is now in control of Arakan, Arakan army has not declared independence from Myanmar. It still remains part of Myanmar. Now the question is, what kind of negotiation they will be dealing with Tatmadaw in the future, we don't know. But the point is, we also need a written agreement. Even if it is informal, written agreement is required with Tatmadaw. So four levels of agreement is required if you want to make sense of the corridor. But more importantly, if it is humanitarian support, giving food and basic necessities of medicine, I think Bangladesh has what you call the logistics and what you call the framework to do it by itself. I don't think you need the UN. I understand some funds have been committed, which is quite it's a contradiction, because on the one hand, the Rohingya support in Cox's Bazar went down because the United States under Donald Trump is cutting cost and probably will make further cutting in the future. Only the life-saving support is still on, but at the same time, you hear that some amount has been allotted to this. Now, I understand that could be the amount that was already allotted through Myanmar, and so it's not a fresh amount, so it's just getting diverted, maybe. But as I said, we need this series of agreements and resolutions so that we know what is going to happen. So I will end by saying that if that is the case, I don't think we can go very far, because you can't violate another country's sovereignty. It's very important, and if you start providing corridor which is conflictual, you will also end up also at one point of time with that same fate. If some other countries want some corridor of some form to help some other groups, you never know. So I will end by saying that I think we need an out-of-box thinking, and this is where CRIC and ourselves have been working on this idea of a mini Marshall Plan or a Marshall Plan, and that is mainly to create an economic incentives. Of course, we can talk about that during the Q&A session, but just to give you a sense that don't forget the Marshall Plan, Secretary of State George Marshall, and a Nobel laureate of, people forget that he got a Nobel Prize for this idea of Marshall Plan. So George Marshall really outlined it, pretty early. His Harvard speech made this plan. Public in June 1947, but they started working on it a year or two before, almost in the middle of Second World War, or in the middle of war. And so, and that made a difference between France and Germany and whole of Europe. If you look at the figures, some of the growth that they had with the Marshall Plan is absolutely extraordinary. And now the idea has got even, people in the Middle East. We hear from Prince Turki, the former intelligence chief of Saudi Arabia, also talking of Marshall Plan in the Gaza. And I understand, Canadian outfits are particularly Smart Settle is already involved also with the Gaza Marshall Plan. So I will stop by saying that, we need to think out of the box to see whether we can come up with a Marshall Plan in the Arakan region or in Myanmar, which would benefit all and which would help resolve the issue. And not to mention, Tatmadaw and Arakan would also see benefit in getting the 1.3 million Rohingyas back and that is only in Bangladesh alone. There are Rohingyas in 19 other countries in the world. So that's the approach I think we need to work on, and this particular platform is committed to work on that. That particular out-of-box approach. The research itself, the process itself, is interesting because today or tomorrow one has to work something on that line. I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Imtiaz. I think it's such a well-rounded discussion. And especially the audience, please note Dr. Imtiaz's observation about the ongoing dialogue or discussion going on in Bangladesh about the humanitarian corridor. The audience, it's time to welcome and introduce Miss Lillian Fan, our distinguished guest today from Malaysia. Let me have the privilege to read her very, I would say, rich bio. She's a co-founder and co-director of, if I am not pronouncing correctly, I beg apology, Lillian, Jiutenue Malaysia, a humanitarian organization based in Kuala Lumpur. And she also serves as the head of the secretariat to the all-party parliamentary group Malaysia on Refugee Policy, a bipartisan caucus of 9 members of parliament in Malaysia since 2019, and the head of the secretariat to the Malaysian Advisory Group on Myanmar, chaired by Tan Sri Dato Seri Dr. Said Hamid Albar. She's a steering committee member of the Southeast Asia Women Peace Mediators, established by Indonesian Foreign Minister His Excellency Retno Warsidi in 2020. Lillian was also appointed in 2020 as a commissioner on the International Lancet Commission for Health and Human Rights. She is a cultural anthropologist and humanitarian professional with more than 25 years of experience working with refugees, internally displaced persons, and communities affected by conflict and disaster, including displaced persons from Myanmar, Palestine, Syria, Afghanistan, and Yemen. She is a former research associate with the Overseas Development Institute in London and previously served in Myanmar as advisor to the Special Envoy. And she is connected with many groups in the list. I'll just mention a few. She provides regular expertise to a range of institutions and governments, including the UN, World Bank, Government of Malaysia, Malaysian Parliament, Government of Indonesia, and ASEAN. She holds an MA in anthropology from Columbia University, New York. What a privilege to welcome Lillian to this discussion. Lillian, we will be very much interested to listen to you today in your opening remarks, and then, of course, we'll engage with you in the Q&A session. Please take floor and share your ideas about the conflict itself, role of ASEAN, and whatever you would like to say and share with us. Thank you. Floor is yours.
Thank you
Go
so
ahead.
much, Professor Kausar. Thank you. And thanks, Professor Imtiaz, for the framing for this discussion and for your very salient analysis and points as well. I'm going to talk mainly about the perspective from ASEAN, how ASEAN has been dealing with this extremely complex crisis and conflict. And I think before that, a little bit about the nature of the conflict itself. I think we do need to realize that this crisis obviously is not something that started just with the military coup in 2021. As Professor Imtiaz mentioned, there are issues of contested and fragmented sovereignty within Myanmar, and a lot of those are not new. But I think we do need to realize that there's a diversity even with the resistance against the military junta. We do obviously have the main ethnic resistance organizations, and many of those are very old, decades old, in fact. Many of them, really have been in existence, in fact, since the creation of an independent Myanmar. And that's also because of the failure of the Panglong Agreement, which was, back in 1947. That's when the Panglong Agreement was signed, and the lack of number one, I think, lack of full inclusion of many groups in that agreement. And then number two, the failure of, actual implementation of some of the points of those agreements. And very contested ideas of sovereignty even then during the negotiations for that agreement. But I think even more important than that, an enormous exclusion of even who was seen to be necessary to be at the table, even for that agreement. And I think, secondly, we need to recognize that some of the groups who we're talking about, so obviously a lot of the conversation today has also so far been about Arakan. And the Arakan Army is a newer group. It's not a group that emerged back in the 40s and 50s. It's actually a group that emerged much later, but has become one of the strongest ethnic armed organizations in the entire country, and arguably is the one that's closest to taking, the entire territory of the state that where they're fighting, and is also, in fact, supporting a lot of the resistance in other parts of Myanmar as well. And that is a force that actually emerged much later, just in the last 15 years. The next thing is that I think it's really important to understand that the resistance now in Myanmar is not only ethnic. It's not only the ethnic nationalities or, ethnic minorities who have armed groups who are fighting against the junta. I think it's very important to understand that, in fact, it's a much wider nationwide resistance. And there are many groups within the Bama majority who are also actively not just resisting against the junta, but creating alternatives, creating alternative forms of governance. That's really important to understand. And you can look at areas, including those areas that were most affected by the earthquake recently, the tragic earthquake in Upper Burma, Mandalay, Sagaing, Magway. Even in those areas, you actually have very strong emerging, not emerging, I mean, they've been basically resisting since the coup, but emerging forms of governance that these resistance groups are creating, alternative forms of governance to the State Administration Council. So I think that's important to understand. The youth as well, I would say, are playing an extremely important role in this resistance, not only, in terms of taking up arms, but I think we need to understand that, the start of the revolution against the military was actually led by young people and professionals. It wasn't started actually by the ethnic organizations. It was started by doctors, teachers, professionals who resisted against the coup, and they were the first ones to basically start striking and start, conducting civil disobedience against, what they saw was obviously, a rejection of the election, which had been held, and the election results, basically. So there was a lot of anger. There is still a lot of anger. And there's a lot of, I think now, commitment to build an alternative. So I think that when we're talking about, the context of Myanmar, we need to take that into account. There are emerging alternative governance structures throughout the country, not only in the ethnic territories. In the ethnic territories, there's a lot more consolidation of, strength. The military now holds less territory than the ethnic groups do. It controls less of the border. It's not 100%, controlled by the resistance, but it is increasing. The territory and the border areas which are held by the resistance are increasing by the day. The humanitarian situation, of course, is very dire in, I would say, most parts of Myanmar now. And that's for many reasons. It's because of, obviously, the fighting, the lack of access, the lack of humanitarian, channels to, deliver humanitarian aid safely, but and accountably. But I would say it's also because of the destruction of, fundamental systems that keep, people's welfare stable. Primarily the destruction of the health system, the food security system. All of these have been devastated by these years of, conflict and the intensification of conflict. But it's also important to understand that there are parallel systems that have been built and are being built by the resistance. So, parallel health systems, for example, even in areas where territorial control has been obtained by resistance. Some of the hospitals that were state hospitals have now been taken over. So I think it's important to understand that, but also the fact that there are ongoing airstrikes that are taking place by the Myanmar military that are in, consistently destroying whatever's left of those systems. So I think that that's a bit of the context that we have to understand as well. So even I think this talk about, what's the humanitarian pathway? What are the humanitarian priorities, and what kind of strategies can we look at? We need to be thinking, I think, not just outside the box of the humanitarian corridor, but we need to be thinking in a much more holistic way, in terms of both short-term assistance as well as longer term, when we're thinking about basically helping Myanmar rebuild, helping the people of Myanmar rebuild systems inside the country. It has to be a diversified kind of thinking where we are thinking about the reality of stakeholders and who has power rather than just who has official sovereignty. And even I think I would say the official sovereignty, that itself is also very contested. I do think that the international systems and the regional systems need to update themselves and need to find ways of, not only engaging one side, we need to be engaging all sides. It's complex, but I think if the humanitarian imperative is something that we adhere to, it's important for us to look at, ways that practically engage de facto authorities, anyone who is in control of a particular area, anyone who has authority, territorial control, has to be engaged, has to be negotiated with. And I think it's a second question about recognition. I think that obviously it's complex when it comes to, what regional states and even the international community decide about political recognition, but that shouldn't be a barrier to engaging, any group, armed or not, whether it's the military based in Naypyidaw or it's armed groups, based in the border states, or civilian resistance based in, Upper Burma. I think that there has to be a diversity of engagement, and really also looking at strategies where we can ensure there's a level of accountability. It's not just about engaging groups and handing aid over. I think that's a very dangerous kind of approach. And I think this is what, Prof. Imtiaz was saying about the lack of kind of mechanisms to monitor at this point, and the lack of, international agreements right at the level of Security Council or General Assembly. That is very clear. It's very clearly needed. I mean, some type of actual agreement and mechanism should be in place before any type of corridor is agreed to. It has been done in very difficult situations before. It has been done in Syria, for example, even when the Bashar administration did not agree to cross-border aid from Turkey. There was still, support that was even obtained from all members of the Security Council, including Russia. And Russia is an ally of, was an ally of the Bashar administration. But nonetheless, it was still possible. And I think what it takes is political will for, very intensive negotiations to enable some understanding that, allowing for cross-border aid, allowing for humanitarian corridors doesn't necessarily lead to recognition of the groups who are in control of territories which will be used for channeling the aid. If you can separate those two issues, it becomes easier. I think that is critical. To get the agreement from all sides, as Prof. Imtiaz was saying. It's important to get agreement, obviously, from all the actors there. And I think one of the main actors who wasn't mentioned just now are actually the Rohingya. They need to have a say in this, and they, as a political actor, not only as a group of beneficiaries and recipients of aid. And obviously, in Rakhine, it's a very diverse population. It's a place where you have, Rohingya majority in certain areas. You have Rakhine majority in other areas. You also have other minorities who are in the state. You have Kaman, you have, a lot of different, much, much smaller groups who are also part of the territory, and a lot of people who are really still displaced. And the displacement has been, frequent, it's been ongoing. It has been actually affecting all communities in slightly different ways. But, the ongoing shelling of many parts of Rakhine State by the military as well has also required more people to keep moving. And displacement has been, I think, something that's affected a large population in Rakhine for so many years now. Even back in 2012, when the violence broke out twice in 2012, there was an enormous number of displaced people that, before the coup, still had not returned to their homes. And so there's been actually a lot of layers, right? Really layers of displacement and dire humanitarian need. There were reports of famine, basically, in Rakhine State as well a few months ago. All these reports have to be verified, and there really needs to be urgent access. The lack of doctors, the lack of medical, professionals, the spread of disease, the very vulnerable situation of women and children, the lack of protection, the number of people who are vulnerable to trafficking is enormous. And I mean, even in Malaysia, with my organization, which is pronounced Gatanyo, by the way, Professor Kausa, it means all of us. We basically work with new arrivals mainly from Myanmar. Not just Rohingya, but the majority of our cases are Rohingya because the need is so high. And the vast majority of them have been displaced numerous times. And many of them, in fact, an increasing number, are people who've actually been trafficked, not just willingly, leaving the camp, but a very high number of trafficked children and people affected by infectious diseases as well. So ASEAN, just to close maybe with a bit of analysis on ASEAN, the ASEAN approach to the crisis, and I'm talking about the recent crisis, the coup, was basically the development of the 5-point consensus. And as we know, the 5-point consensus is quite basic. It's actually calling for very basic things, including a cessation of hostilities, the delivery of humanitarian assistance, and for an inclusive political dialogue. And appointment of a special envoy and the special envoy to visit Myanmar. So the appointment of special envoy, that is something which rotates basically for each chair. So this year, Malaysia is chair of ASEAN, and we have a special envoy of the ASEAN chair. It's Tan Sri Othman Hashim, who is a long-time, very seasoned diplomat who comes from a background both of multilateral diplomacy and also of human rights. And each chair, I think the interesting thing about the ASEAN approach, one thing is that it's a bit difficult for the continuity, and something Malaysia is working on now as well, to make sure there is continuity amongst, between approaches of each chair. But I think one of the interesting things is the ability to be creative. So a little bit to think outside that box. And Malaysia is doing that. Malaysia is trying to work on an approach that really, breaks down each of those points, especially the three main points: the cessation of hostilities, the humanitarian assistance, and inclusive dialogue, in a way that is a lot more detailed, is a lot more, precise, and is not trying to aim for, magical solutions overnight, but actually really trying to work through a much more nuanced understanding. So, for example, on cessation of hostilities, the discussion is not about, just ending all violence. It's actually about trying to look at the specific forms of violence which could be prioritized for discussion of reduction. So de-escalation, for example, looking at the targeting of, civilian infrastructure, for example, looking at, the targeting of hospitals, trying to talk to both sides and saying that should be prohibited. These are obviously protected facilities under IHL, under international humanitarian law, but can there be an agreement where both sides, at least come to some principles about, what to attack and what not to attack, what is a legitimate target, for example. So it's those kinds of discussions that Malaysia is engaged in now. It's, whether it will be successful or not, I think it remains to be seen. But I think that at least it's an approach which, understands that we need to have a lot more nuance and a lot more precision when it comes to even talking to the various stakeholders, to the crisis. On humanitarian assistance as well, it's something which Malaysia is pushing for multi-track. So it's not just one approach. There is obviously the AHA Center, which is a very state-centric, body which coordinates aid among the ASEAN member states, but it is a very state-centric mechanism which won't be changed overnight, and is probably not the best entity to deliver aid to resistance areas, even though it has managed to deliver aid to a few resistance areas recently, which is, I think, very positive. But it will not be effective in trying to push for aid in most of those areas, also because it does still have a very strong relationship with the SAC, and therefore also won't be trusted in some of those areas, and also will not be allowed by the SAC to go into many of those areas. So that's a negotiation. But Malaysia sees this and has seen this, from the beginning of the chairmanship. So is not just trying to push one mechanism. Malaysia understands that it has to be beyond the AHA Center. There have to be alternative approaches, and therefore is engaged in discussions on cross-border aid, how to strengthen those channels, how to take some of those discussions forward, and also looking, really at even what ASEAN NGOs can do. So, for example, now since the earthquake, there've been, quite a number of Malaysian organizations, both NGOs as well as obviously the Malaysian government. The Malaysian government, sent a SMART team, which was a search and rescue team, to Sagaing, and actually negotiated to go to Sagaing, which is a contested area, and also then sent a military hospital. So I think some of you will remember the military field hospital that we had in Cox's Bazar for so many years, which Malaysia was very, proud of, and I visited personally many times. So we still have it. It's the same type of facility, a more, sort of emergency, not really with a building. It's more still intense. But our defense ministry has basically deployed a field hospital to Sagaing, which was initially for a month, and now it's been extended until the 26th of May. And that as well, it was deliberately put in a contested area. In fact, they first tried to put it in a resistance area, and then the SAC, pushed back on that. But in the discussion that our Prime Minister had with recently with General Min Aung Hlaing, they managed to get an agreement to put it in an area that was contested and accessible by all communities under different territorial control. The Prime Minister also met with the Prime Minister of the National Unity Government, and that set a precedent. So I think that it's hopefully going to be, something which following ASEAN chairs will have to follow as well, that you meet with both sides. And at whatever level you would like to do it, you can't just talk to one side. So I think that is a very important approach as well. And the special envoy himself, is continuously, he's in a full-time role. So he also, engages with various stakeholders, basically as part of his day job. So he is engaging constantly with stakeholders from both the resistance as well as from the military. So that's just a little bit of a snapshot, of the Malaysia's approach to the ASEAN chairmanship engagement on Myanmar, and happy to discuss more in Q&A.
Thank you, Lillian. I think it was a very comprehensive overview of Malaysia's role in this conflict, including humanitarian aid. I think our audience is greatly benefited understanding what are the dimensions of support that Malaysia is rendering to the people, displaced people, and as well as to the people of Myanmar. Thank you so much, Lillian, for doing that. Folks, we are going to be starting our Q&A session. It's an open session, but it is limited to our folks present in the studio. First, I'd like to invite Dr. Ernest Thiessen and Ernest, and then we'll go to David Newman, our advisor, and also Dr. Halal Mohiuddin. Ernest, what do you want to ask today? You have heard in the last one about the humanitarian corridor, and today also Professor Imtiaz spoke quite a bit about it, and you have heard Lillian. If you have any question, Ernest, unmute. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, that's very interesting. Obviously, Lillian has been involved with this situation for a long time, very knowledgeable. So we've learned a lot during this this talk that she just gave. Thank you, Lillian. And I guess this group here together with CRRIC, we have the idea of what's called a mini Marshall Plan to engage all of the stakeholders. And you emphasized that a number of times that all the stakeholders need to be engaged, even the Rohingya. And so that's our idea, to engage all of the stakeholders in a comprehensive plan for peace, not issue by issue and not piecemeal, but a comprehensive plan. And so, we propose to facilitate those discussions through a neutral site that Smart Settle has developed. And we understand we can't just walk in there and say, well, you do this, because it's never been done before at this level. So we are actually in the process of simulating that process and producing a proof of concept that we hope to present to the stakeholders. And I guess if you've seen any of our videos, we did a similar thing for the Gaza situation, a Gaza Marshall Plan simulation. So it would be very interesting to get your comments on that kind of an approach. But maybe it's not fair to ask you if you haven't seen our materials. Is Lillian still here?
No, I think we lost her temporarily. Maybe she will rejoin. So Ernest, do you have any specific question? Yeah, she's back. So Ernest, do you have any question for Lillian? I mean, particularly if you're interested about the stakeholders and other things like that.
Yeah, so we lost you for a moment, Lillian. And so I was just wondering about your comments on, how it might work to engage all of the stakeholders in a comprehensive peace process.
Yeah, Lillian. Yeah.
Sure. I don't think it's going to be that easy, to be honest. I think that many of the groups, there are sort of clusters of them that work better together. There are others who have stronger alliances with other groups. There are some already involved in, I wouldn't say they're really peace plans in that sense, but definitely ceasefire discussions mediated by China. China's been playing a very active role with basically trying to broker ceasefires with certain groups, particularly the Brotherhood, right? The Three Brotherhood Alliance, and also with the Kachin. But those are basically, China's approach has been to engage the groups that are either on their border or where they have large investments, right? So it's not on their border, but they have enormous investments in Rakhine State and a lot of interest there. And I think China's been very blunt, or very they're not trying to pretend that it's a big peace process, right? They are really quite transparent about the fact that it's really just brokering ceasefires and trying to get the groups to come to some level of agreement on, you withdraw from this area and you get some trade benefits, on, revenue from trade across the border, for example. That's like in the case of MNDAA. So I don't think that it's going to be very easy to sort of get everybody into some kind of peace plan. Plus, I also don't think a lot of groups actually want to talk to the military. I think most groups don't want to talk to the military. They have the upper hand now. The resistance has the upper hand. I don't think there's really too much of a genuine interest of sitting down and negotiating with the Tatmadaw. I think there's obviously an interest in, having the Tatmadaw take a step away from power and maybe, basically just go back to the barracks and play, to figure out some kind of role. There are some discussions about that. What kind of role could they play, but really to get them out of political power. But there doesn't seem to be a lot of, consensus even around that. And neither is there faith that the Tatmadaw has any sincerity to actually engage in that kind of discussion. So I don't think we're anywhere close to bringing all the groups around a table for some kind of peace negotiation.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Imtiaz.
Right, thank you.
Yeah.
We
Just to-
certainly
just to
recognize that, and so our idea is to engage them in simulations to make them comfortable with the process before we ask them to participate in a real one.
Yeah, just to respond to Ernest's question, I think the way it can be done is if we can break them down into different levels. It can be done easily at the track 2 level. I don't think it should be a problem to bring the stakeholders at the track 2 level. Not all the conflicting parties are required to begin with. I think some of the stakeholders around the regions, their consent is required to begin with if you want to work out on a different approach. And I believe if we can start with the track 2 level, it doesn't have to be all countries together. It can be 2 or 3 countries more like-minded together, and then build upon that. So once the track 2 level is done, the track 2 level then can feed into track 1, and tell whatever has been the progress that has come about. At the same time, engaging with the Arakan Army and Tatmadaw can also be done at different regions and countries, not necessarily inside Myanmar. It can be done outside Myanmar, whether in Bangkok or Kuala Lumpur would be an ideal place. So I think if you can get them at least, the process itself is I think is very important. It may not result in a very good, what you call an ideal kind of outcome. It may not be the case. It could be, but the process itself would be interesting because the process is very non-conflicting and not alienating. You're not alienating anyone. You're trying to understand the other, that what would be their health policy, what kind of health instruments they would need, how many hospitals they would need. And I think Lilian pointed out that some of the hospitals which has fallen into the dissenting groups, they are now trying to manage. Who would be the external investors who would be interested in supporting that hospitals? Just to give an example. Similarly, on education, on agriculture is a very... I go back to Marshall Plan, because if you look at the history of Marshall Plan, they had all kinds of areas, including agriculture, in a very big way. And so, and there are critics who now point out that the development that you see, particularly the infrastructure development, the roads and highways that were built across the countries who were enemies, actually they go back to Marshall Plan. They bulldozed some of the areas and made highways so that they can interact. Whereas before Marshall Plan, they were closed. Almost the borders were closed. So I guess the process is very important. And now that Smart Settle has worked on the Gaza Marshall Plan, I think they can also give their input as what can be done. And if we can bring some in Kuala Lumpur, or some in Singapore, or some in Bangkok, maybe some in Dhaka, different types, and that's one of the purpose of this particular project. Kausar probably would be telling more later on, particularly to Lilian. One idea is to have a conference in Kuala Lumpur. That's one of the idea. After we have finished our report on the framework report, which we are going to discuss in September in Winnipeg. There too, if Lilian can have time, if you can give time, and if you can come to Winnipeg in September, I think the dates are already fixed. Kausar can give you more precise dates,
Right.
and see what, because Smart Settle will also be there talking about their approach, and we will have our concept paper ready by then, hopefully. So I see the process to be very important. And of course, the Rohingyas would be, part of this whole exercise, because after all, they have to carry, the idea of the health, health investment, education investment, fertilizer investment. It's their ball game. But I think if we can start working on the process, particularly at the track 2 level, we should be, we should not really harm anyone. I think other countries who are now maybe suspicious of each other probably would welcome this particular approach. So unless and until we start, we will not know that. But knowing some of the other economic incentives, even Marshall Plan, don't forget, Germany and Italy were absolutely enemies of the United States. But here, the United States had the courage to support a former enemy in such a short, just boom, just after the war. It's amazing. And the people accepted it, and it worked pretty well. So I think one should go back to the idea of Marshall Plan and see the good side of it, and how it helped very bitter enemies to come together. So I'm hopeful, at the track 2 level. I understand what Lillian's saying, at a broad track 1 level, probably it'd be very difficult, to bring all the stakeholders. But track 2 level, I'm sure, they probably would welcome the approach. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I think we have to try. Unless we try, we won't know. I think Dr. Imtiaz has made a point. David, please join in the question and answer. Yeah.
Yeah, I found the presentations today very instructive and thought-provoking. So some of the thoughts provoked that I wanted to address to our new friend Liliane. The first one is think track 3. Okay, think of people who are respected professionals, academics, business leaders, community leaders, whether youth or for women or for for example, Rotarians, people who have expertise respecting the environment, expertise respecting anthropology and sociology and psychology, and imagine them being the participants in what I would call essentially a role playing, but you're playing authentically your own role. You're pursuing your own. You're sharing your own expertise and your desire for resolution in a simulated process to effectively demonstrate that intelligent, enlightened, well-meaning people can come to a consensus agreement on the complex issues based on long history, based on a lot of trauma, based on a lot of anger, hurt, harm, and through the augmented intelligence and process of smart settle, bring in objective data that is brought into the process to enhance a facilitated dialogue, which also involves trust building in the initial stages. So I'd really like your feedback, whether there would be people, for example, that you would recommend from your knowledge of the area to participate in that kind of way. And I'll just say what my next question is, because I think the first one is something that I would want a lot of thought about, and not just an answer now, but a more expansive answer when you think about it. But the second question really relates to, here we are based in Winnipeg, Canada, And my background is in the legal profession and in government and community leadership. And here we are concerned about a distant country. And why is that so? It's because we are ourselves a city of diversity, a country of diversity, a country that is coming to grips with a multi-nation confederation involving our indigenous peoples. We've already done it with French, English, and now it's far more complex than that. So we're engaged in that process. So we're effectively learning together. Malaysia's no mystery to this, and Myanmar, of course, is the immediate area of concern. But my question to you is, and maybe you could answer this one first, how do you feel from Malaysia about having Canada involved and in this process that is funded by Global Affairs Canada primarily, but also will be hopefully with amplified funding from Rotarians around the world? How do you feel about we from Canada being involved in this, and how can we best serve the process from your perspective in the ASEAN region?
Thank you so much, David. I will think also about your first comments, and I'll definitely get back to you on who I think would be who I could recommend, for some kind of track 3 engagement. I do think that that's a great approach. But in terms of Canada's involvement, I mean, I think it shouldn't really be asking us in Malaysia. It should really be asking the people of Myanmar. And I think that at this point, I like ASEAN's trying to do what it can. Malaysia's trying to do what it can. The conflict and the complexity and the level of how would I say it? I mean, it's not just suffering, but I think the level of change and transformation that's happening in Myanmar, which includes, of course, very dire humanitarian situation, but that's not obviously the whole picture. I think it needs engagement from the entire global community. I don't think it's, I definitely don't think anybody should be drawing, geopolitical barriers to the engagement, but I think the engagement should be something which, people stakeholders in Myanmar themselves feel is really useful, because there has been a lot of outreach to them and a lot of different initiatives as well. Some have been helpful. I think some have been less helpful. So I don't think it's really about any particular country. I mean, Canada's been phenomenal, right? Canada has been one of the countries that has given so much support, not just to Myanmar since the coup, but in an ongoing way. And I think, while there's of course a lot more that can be done, I think Canada's approach is always perceived as being extremely sincere. And definitely from also my work on refugees, Canada has been really one of the top, partners to really work on, resettlement of refugees, not just in terms of numbers. I mean, the US has always been higher in numbers, but I think in terms of a genuine approach, I work very closely with the Canadian High Commission in Kuala Lumpur as well. They're very good, colleagues and friends. We're always sharing analysis, and I think Canada plays an important role. But again, I think that anyone's engagement, including ASEAN, right? I think even ASEAN's engagement, even ASEAN chair engagement, the fact that we are the chair and, we have some type of official mandate doesn't necessarily mean that we're welcomed by the Myanmar stakeholders unless we can genuinely show that there's, we're taking an approach which resonates with them. And I think that's the level of, ownership that we need to be giving to the people of Myanmar, and the level of respect that we need to be giving to them always. It's really about, asking them how we can be most constructive and most helpful.
Really appreciate that response. I think that the kind of guidance that is most useful is to how we can best earn that trust with the people of Myanmar that might be involved, even in this track 3 approach, right? So it does happen. For example, we know some people there. I mean, we have some wonderful people in Winnipeg from Malaysia, and we have some wonderful people who are Rotary Peace Fellows who happen to be in Myanmar as well. And what we're concerned about is their safety. We're concerned about if their participation in something like this, how can we optimally ensure that they're not going to be retaliated against by one or more of the diverse conflicting groups in the region. So I think your guidance in that respect will also be most welcome. How can we mitigate the possibilities of harm being inflicted on people that do participate in this track 3 kind of process?
Thank you, David. Dr. Imtiaz, do you have any comments?
No. I think it's a good beginning. We just need to continue talking to people. And as David was saying, the Rotarians, they have quite a, even in this region, and Lillian would know more. I know they're very much involved in Thailand. And so I believe that track 3 approach can also be very helpful, at least at the initial stage. I think what is important is to break the ice to begin with. Once the mental barrier is down, once they start trusting you, no, they don't mean any harm. They want to help in all possible ways with new ideas. I believe from there one can really develop something extraordinary. And as I said, if you go back to the Marshall Plan, nobody thought it would work. When he gave his talk at the Harvard, there were a lot of skeptics, but there you are. After a few years, he ended up getting a Nobel Prize. So my point is, I think this is the right time, because several approaches have been worked out, which is fine. I have nothing against them. But if we can add this particular one and start the research to begin with, I believe we will be contributing something, down the line. Yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Hilal is patiently waiting for all the way. Dr. Hilal, please jump in if you have any question for our guests today. And of course, you have written extensively. You have spoken on this topic. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. I was just listening very with great interest and learned a lot. I still have a lot of questions. I think I have more questions than answers, and it's related with track 3 activities, and Smart Share will also be benefited about that. I have a question to Lillian. Lillian, I see some kind of disconnect there about the NUG and civil society, especially civil society engagement. Think about this thing, that civil society is the one that is unarmed and the students are the other group. Just leave them behind because they don't have that power. But at least the civil society has enormous soft power. They can make a huge change. And they started the movement, as you mentioned before. And we are also seeing that they can make influence. So is there any disconnect between them, the civil society and NUG? The ASEAN and Malaysia can really make a networking tie or mediate this kind of networking between these organizations, because that will make our track 3 activities much easier and much safer, because we can't take risk that we can go to the battlefield, direct battle under the shelling. So something that really works. This is one. It's about disconnect. Number one, it's NUG and the civil society connections, and whether ASEAN and whether Malaysia independently as a country can really make a big difference in this kind of role playing. Number two, it's about cross-border illegal migration. Many people are still migrating, as you mentioned, that from 2012 onward, the process really started, and there are a lot of mishaps, and the criminal activities are also going on, like trafficking, child trafficking, sex trafficking, different types of trafficking. How the bordering countries forget about Bangladesh. We know about Bangladesh, about the Rohingya situation a lot because we are seeing that in person, just it's in front of our eyes. What about the Cambodia or Thailand situation? How people are entering there and how governments are really tackling those problems, are seeing them as problems. They are also thinking about repatriating them. Like there is a question in Bangladesh nowadays that we are talking about a humanitarian corridor that Bangladesh can mediate. And as I understand, probably we don't need that kind of formal recognition of Security Council or General Assembly. It can be done. Syrian example is there. And it can be done with other like NUG, Arakan Army, and Bangladesh government if we subside, if we try to avoid the military junta, because they are the only opponents to this idea. Otherwise, China doesn't have strong opposition, India doesn't have opposition, Russia doesn't have any opposition. So we see that there are some sort of positive thing that Bangladesh can be leveraged. That's one part. So this humanitarian corridor can be, but how much support? People are asking the question of why not Thailand, because Thailand is the biggest ally of the United States, and United States is having joint military force training and all kind of other activities over the last couple of decades. So they have a stronghold there, and it's very easy for them to intervene, not intervene, just to make some diplomatic efforts in that line. But now, as we see that Trump's foreign, I think the diplomatic interests are somewhat different. He's not really going for any kind of escalation of any conflicts, not especially at this moment. For some strange reasons, we don't know why. And things are evolving and emerging all the times. In this situation, there is a kind of, I think, positive vibe that we can leverage in terms of our planning. So do you think there is a possibility that we'll be getting help from ASEAN as an organization, from Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore, Vietnam, Cambodia, because they have investment in Myanmar? So this is the second one. And the very third one that I am talking is about my country, Rohingyas. We are talking about a stakeholder engagement. 1.3 million people are living there and they don't have any leadership. That's the problem. Since they don't have the leadership, who will be our talking point? Will be our communication point, network point? That's a very big question, because whenever a leader that is impartial, that is not really with ARSA or with Arakan Army, trying to be just a leader of the Rohingyas, displaced, this person get killed. That's a common scenario. We have many different examples. So they don't have leadership. 1.3 million people are without leadership in Rohingya camps in Bangladesh. In this dire situation, when things are emerging fast and changing, transforming all the time, can you just suggest us some good policy? How can we get into track 3 with getting Rohingya representation in a real, workable, doable way? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hilal. Quite challenging questions. I think for the first point, looking at, the regional engagement will be different depending on which country is leading. And the level of priority, I would say, when it comes to, engaging the stakeholders in Myanmar as well, each ASEAN country has a different interpretation of who's important to engage. I think from Malaysia's perspective, it's on the resistance side. On the military side, it's clear. But I think on the resistance side, it's not only NUG who Malaysia feels is important, and it's not also only the ethnic resistance organizations. It's also these other groups, civil society, as you call them, but also the civilian resistance. That is very important. And the groups which are involved in governance, right, actually running the emerging governance from the resistance. That is an important stakeholder. And one thing that the Malaysian government is allowing for is also for the group that I'm part of, the Malaysian Advisory Group on Myanmar, to convene a few discussions at the track 2 level, which are, inviting think tanks, inviting analysts, inviting, different groups from Myanmar, but on thematic issues. So we are having a discussion soon on the humanitarian access in a broader perspective, looking at cross-border, looking at these systems, but also, an upcoming discussion on the elections and democracy. And those are all things which, the Malaysian government is supportive of and endorses, but they're letting a group like ours, which is a group of, people in very influential people involved and interested in Myanmar and advising our government on positions and also on who to engage. They're giving us that space to convene closed-door discussions on these thematic issues and then to learn from them. So I think that's also quite a unique approach that perhaps other ASEAN chairs have not done yet. And looking at, the relationship between NUG and some of the other groups, the civil society groups, I think that, it's strong enough in terms of the fact that many of them have the same positions, the same fundamental positions. I think where there is, divergence or maybe, differences is more in terms of the fact that a lot of these groups are the ones who are leading and trying to do work on the ground every single day. So is the NUG at a level, but I think that many of these groups are doing so, without enough structure, without enough resources. And I think that if there's any kind of difference that they have, any differences that they have, or disagreements that they have, it's probably perhaps because some of them feel that NUG is not being strong enough on certain issues, right? And, I would say that, they're the ones on the ground. They see that the change isn't fast enough. They'll see that they get very frustrated. They see that the airstrikes are continuing. Perhaps they think that the strategies that, the leadership are taking are not effective enough. So I think that's also a healthy relationship, because I think that it's one of holding leaders accountable. And I think that that is something which you can see in, basically the post-coup, resistance. There's a lot of call for accountability, including from their own leaders. And it's a very genuine, democratic spirit. There's constant discussions and, critique of each other, critique of, the structures, critique of processes, and holding each other accountable. And I see that even among, different platforms of civilian resistance, basically each one advising the other or holding the other one to account of, not upholding the principles and the processes of the revolution, right? And it's that type of thing that's happening. And so I think it's not about fundamental differences, it's more about those kinds of differences. In terms of looking at the borders and the border security, the illicit, businesses and also migration, I think a lot of it is displacement, right? I mean, it's not, I wouldn't even call it, illegal migration. I would call it forced displacement and trafficking. The smuggling is also taking place, obviously, but smuggling in a context of forced migration when people don't have a choice, or forced displacement when you don't have a choice of, any other means to leave. And I think, the case in point in this is the fact that, most Rohingya don't have documents which allow them legal travel across borders. So the fact that they have to use, channels which are illegal doesn't mean, that it's not because it's their choice. It's because it's basically there's no other option, right? It's not because they like to use these illegal channels. I don't think any of them or any people would like to, be putting themselves and their families at so much risk. But if you have no other option, that's the route you're going to use, especially if the other option is facing, dire insecurity and possibly even death. In terms of engaging leadership for the Rohingya, I think it has to be about a change of approach. I think there are leaders among the Rohingya community. They're not going to be the people who are making themselves very visible. That is, I think, the thing that we need to understand. The real leaders, the ones who are really working with the community, are not people who are, really out there on social media, who are, making themselves visible, because it is risky. It's extremely risky. And if, as you said, Dr. Hilal, I mean, I think we all knew Mohibullah very well. He was a close friend of mine as well. He's a classic example of how, an effective leader could just be assassinated very in cold blood. And I think many of the leaders today see that. And therefore, there are leaders. There are people who are doing a lot of work for their community. There are also a number of, emerging leaders who are very strategic. But at the same time, I think we have to accept that most of the work is really quite underground at the moment, because it has to be. So I would say that it has to be a change of approach on the side of those who want to engage. It should, we should be doing more homework and doing more due diligence about who are engaging and looking at that. And I do think it is hard to see, but they're there. And I think that that's one of the things which is really important, for anyone who's, really interested in engaging, taking a bit more time to find them, having some of those conversations, and engaging with people who are not necessarily that visible.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Hilal and Lillian, for very comprehensive response. For the sake of time, we are going to close the Q&A, but there is an interesting question just one of the viewers posted here, as you can see. And if any one of you are interested, you can very briefly comment, because we'll close the session for today. But it's one of the comments I received, and I thought it is interesting. And the Mr. Mustafizur Rahman, who is saying that, is it because of the incompetencies of the nations or the unwillingness to commit seriously, or because of the duplicity of their policy? Does the trend gives us a hope of silver lining?
Kaiser David here, being a human rights guy going way back, what I think would answer that question, and also probably a lot of puzzlement of we from the West, is what degree, number one, of appreciation is there for the whole concept of human rights within Myanmar? That's number one. And number two, is there any appreciation for the value of being identified as indigenous peoples under the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which hits head on, for example, the issue of Rohingya stateless status? So those are my two questions, and maybe Lillian could answer that, and at the same time answer the question from the viewer.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe Dr. Imtiaz can go first.
Okay. No, I can respond to Dr. Mustafiz Rahman's question. I think on the issue of recognition of the Rohingya people by Myanmar, there has been some development. Don't forget, there has been some development. ICJ has recognized in two of its judgments, one provisional judgments and other clarification judgment. They have recognized Rohingya people, and that's a global recognition. And there was a Myanmar judge also, don't forget that. So there was no dissent opinion on that. So that's a development. At the same time, now NUG PDF openly talks about them as Rohingyas. They use the word Rohingyas, and they also pledge that if and when if they ever come to power, they will recognize them. But on a regular basis, whenever we have dialogues with them, and they use the Rohingya. So there has been some changes on that direction, and also some of the countries who were earlier using some other terms, they're also, I think, changing and increasingly using the Rohingya. So there has been some development. It's not that whole of Myanmar is not using the concept of Rohingya. I think that is no longer there. So there has been some development. So I think we need to focus on the positive side, and I'm sure Tatmadaw and the Myanmar military will also one day will see the merit in calling the people. I think more important is the development. Once the people, once they develop, I think much of the hatred and intolerance goes away. And we saw that in the Europe, in the context of Europe after Second World War, how the whole of the development of whole of Europe has changed. The interaction with people, though they were in conflict for years. So I see no reason why the same will not be the case when it comes to Myanmar.
Lillian, do you have any comments on this?
I mean, nothing really that much to add, but I do think, I mean, there's obviously been a lot of hypocrisy and a lot of failure, you know, with the lack of recognition, particularly of the Rohingya. But I'd say that it's also symptomatic of a lot of failures against other groups as well, which are also less visible. And I think even some of the groups who have citizenship are being treated or have been treated in a really discriminatory way. So I think that it's also about looking at this issue of inclusion, political inclusion of the Rohingya, as a way to look at all the other forms of exclusion that have happened. And I think that that is something which needs to be understood in the Myanmar context as well. I mean, you have all kinds of groups, and Myanmar Muslims who are citizens, for example, Myanmar Hindus, lots of different groups who have just been not given the type of recognition and equal rights to citizenship as they deserve. So there's a whole reform that needs to happen, I think, in terms of citizenship rights and understandings of belonging, like who belongs to Myanmar and ideas of political national identity and nation building. I think those are all huge challenges that Myanmar is going to have to go through. So, part of it is, yes, there's the policy issue, but I think beyond that, it's also about the broader issue of, national imagination. And challenging even the revolutionary groups to be a lot more critical when it comes to dismantling the forms of the forms of discrimination that have been accepted for so long, particularly in the legal documents and in institutionalized practice.
Thank you so much, Lillian. Once again, the audience, we would like to close the session today. It was absolutely enlightening, and I would say that our both guests today shared their insights about the conflict, the stakeholders approach, and we have also discussed how do we bridge the gap between various parties with regards to not only a peace process but a broader peace building efforts. The audience, please tune with us in the future as well. We are going to continue our series, and next time definitely we are trying to bring other stakeholders into the discussion, and you will learn more about the conflict. And as this project is funded by Global Affairs Canada, we are grateful to the Canadian government to believe in us in order to develop a model for peace intervention in Myanmar. So with this, I would like to close once again. Thank you very much, David Newman, Ernest Thiessen, Dr. Hilal, Dr. Imtiaz, and last but not the least, and most importantly, Lillian, all the way from Malaysia. And as Dr. Imtiaz alluded to, we are going to invite Lillian to come here in person to stay a couple of days with us. A beautiful province, the center of North America, and a place of 1001 lakes. And so you are absolutely welcome. And also forgot to mention that Winnipeg hosts Canadian Museum for Human Rights, one in a kind in the world. So there are many reasons to come, Lillian. So I hope you'd pick one and let us know, and we'll be gladly sponsoring you to listen to you in person. Folks, stay well till then. And as we always close with the word that we all would like to see peace in Myanmar, and whatever efforts it takes, definitely people of Myanmar deserve peace. Thank you very much. Stay well and stay safe. Bye-bye.